Hello, Practicum students, or I should say soon to be Practicum students. You are receiving this email because you have been identified as individual needing Practicum. You're working through that process to identify your Practicum site. Many of you have already submitted your Practicum information form to Lori and looking for that start that will be happening in January for your Practicum over the next 2 semesters. So that'd be the spring semester and then your final semester in the program, which is summer of 22. All right, so that's a little recap of why you're watching this video. Many of you, and you should have already met with me as far as that pre-practicum advising appointment, though I think I've talked to all of you at this point. If you haven't talked to me for your pre-practicum advising appointment, make sure you click the link below and schedule that. But I think we've talked to everybody at this point. Now, and some of you, as we've been talking, we've been receiving more information about what you folks are encountering out there in your practicum. So and there's some difficulties that are being encountered. So here is what, I guess the notifications, so there's 2 notifications I want to give you today. So please take note of that. As we were beginning a reboot or restart of traditional practicum, like COVID didn't exist, individuals were going to be going out to clinical sites or practicum sites. They'll be physically there. You show up at a time, you do your hours, that kind of thing. That also requires that you do a health screen and background check. We've called that process Castle Branch. There's a lot of little pieces in that with the health screening, background check, drug screen, all of that's required when anybody physically shows up for a practicum experience or a clinical experience. That is required. Okay, so we were moving towards a more traditional practicum, but information is coming in. So it appears that there's still a lot of difficulty out there with securing or ensuring a traditional physical practicum. So here is what we're going to do. I know I've talked to some of you about this already, especially those folks that talked to me just recently, because we were kind of making changes on the fly as I'm getting information into you. But here is the first notification, all right? We are going to allow you to do either a traditional physical practicum, which requires you to go through health screens, background checks, all of that process, which we're going to get started for you very, very soon. I'll give you a little bit of info on that as well. And we have to have a clinical agreement in place for your facility and all of that. You can continue with that route if you wish. There are some of you that we've already cleared you because we already have a practicum. We have a clinical agreement, a legal agreement with the facility. And now we're just getting ready to get you started on your health screens and background checks. So some of you have already received a kind of an initial clearance. But with that being said, here is what I'm going to say to you is that you can choose whether you want to do a traditional physical practicum or a virtual practicum. Okay, we've been running virtual ever since COVID, so we were going to try to go back to normal. It's not necessarily working for everybody. And I'm not even sure if we'll ever be able to return to normal because there are so many people working from home, which is causing another issue. So are they ever going to come back physically to the workplace? I don't think a lot of them are, or a good chunk of them aren't. So that's going to limit what our students can do. So you can choose the venue of your practicum experience, whether you want traditional physical, there's pros and cons to that, or you want to go virtual. Pros and cons to that. Let me talk a little bit about those two. Or you could do a hybrid approach. You could do a little bit of mix and match. If you do a little bit of mix and match, you've got to meet all the requirements for the higher standard, which is the physical practicum. And those requirements are the background checks, the health screens, the drug screens, the vaccination records, all that stuff will need to be submitted. You have to get a physical exam. Just being realistic about all the things that you need to do when we place a person physically in a site. Even if you work like directly across the hall, let's say you work in a hospital and you're doing your practicum directly across the hall from where you work. You think, why would I need to do all that? Lawyers. So your status changes. We've tried to argue this. We've argued it with multiple entities. There's no budget. You have to go through all that stuff over again. And I know it seems completely asinine. So don't think anybody's going to get a free pass on the Castle Branch requirements. Everybody has to do it, even if you're doing your practicum in your workplace. I know it doesn't make sense, but because of liability, insurance, legal issues, because you're not really working for an employer when you're on practicum, you're kind of a guest. And if, anyhow, the liability issue. So there is that. So you'd have to meet that higher standard for physical, even if you're doing a hybrid approach of physical practicum. All right, so let me talk a little bit about the two pros and cons of the two different ways. So physical practicum, we've done that for years at the baccalaureate level. And the physically being there, interacting with people, getting to know people, the networking seems to really be an advantage there. They can see how you work. I mean, they're like there. They can see your work ethic. So there's all those things that can be helpful with that. The downside to traditional physical practicum is you got to be there at a certain time. There's a schedule. You have to be there. You have to, log your hours. Some students have had to use vacation time to, they've had to burn their PTO time to do practicum. So there's, childcare issues. There's all of that. When you're basically taking on it's almost like a little tiny part-time job for 120 hours. So there's the downside of that. But the networking is really probably the greatest plus to that, and kind of who you know and not what you know, or who you get to know and not necessarily what you know can be helpful. So that's physical practicum. Virtual practicum is, as you've guessed, you're doing things through Zoom, you're doing things through telecommunication, email, telephone, which doesn't require a clinical contract. It doesn't require health screen, background check, drug screen, vaccination records, and a physical exam. So you eliminate all of that. There's actually no red tape whatsoever with a virtual practicum. You just got to get someone willing to work with you, and all the other stuff goes away. You don't have to do any of the other stuff. The flexibility is great. Again, we've been running this since COVID, so the students have appreciated the flexibility on how they approach practicum. It's much more done on their time in a way. We still have our requirements to meet, but they do log sheets. It includes any time that they work on anything, read an email, do research, take a telephone conference. They count all that time just as they would if they were in physical practicum. The downside would be, again, the networking, though we have found that it still exists, but not to the extent that we see with physical practicum. So you're typically working with a much smaller sphere of individuals virtually, where if you were kind of circulating and having lunch with people and taking, at the physical stuff, you just end up meeting more people. So, but students have still been able to make good contacts, and even though more limited, primarily just with that mentor, or if you're working on a project, that project team, you're just kind of isolated to that particular, universe. So pros and cons of both, but we're going to allow you to choose the route that you want to go. 100% virtual, and it's very easy. Again, you just have to have your mentor to agree to work with you. And we've talked about what to work on, whether it's kind of a project, kind of a project-based thing, or whether you wanted to go with the physical or even hybrid approach, which requires the higher standards of clearance that we need to get. So there you go. So there's the two choices that you can apply. It's taken me 10 minutes to say that, But those are the two choices that you can make. Some of you may be rethinking how you're going to approach practicum, or you could, go back maybe to your mentor and say, maybe you've already established. I know some of you have already gotten, a kind of a track with a physical practicum going. You could present to them, say, hey, can we turn this virtual? My guess is they won't mind. They probably won't mind. But again, up to you. Up to you what you want to do. All right, so that's notice number 2. You can now choose virtual or physical, or notice number 1. Notice number 2 is, I know a lot of you were dealing with Lori Hay in sending your practicum information forms in, and then Lori was working with various people at the college to get the clinical contracts in place, again, assuming these people were doing physical practicums. Lori's going away for some elective surgery, and she's probably going to be out for the rest of the year. So you're going to be dealing with Sadie Jablonski. So look for Sadie to be reaching out to you about that. So she's going to be reaching out to you about Castle Branch. She's going to be reaching out to you to kind of re-identify whether you want to go virtual or whether you want to go traditional physical, because that changes how she's going to move you along the funnel. If you're going physical practicum, she's going to start moving you through, those Castle Branch requirements and making sure we can hopefully get that clinical agreement secured if we don't already have one in place. So look for her to reach out to you soon, especially about if you want to change the venue, or I guess if you want, not to the venue, if you want to change the mode of your practicum. So don't ignore Sadie's emails. They'll be very important over the next couple of months as we kind of get things going for you to start in January. So there we go. There's kind of it in a nutshell. If you have any questions, you can always reach out to Sadie. Again, she'll be reaching out to you. I'm shooting this video on a Friday. I'm assuming she's probably going to hit you up for your first kind of inquiry on venue change, on mode change next week. I will be out of the office next week. So if you do have anything, I'd say reach out to Sadie. If not, and then Sadie and I, if there's something that she can't figure out, when I get back, her and I will talk and see if we can get whatever your question is figured out. So there you go, guys. Everybody have a great weekend. Hopefully, we're giving you additional choices that originally, when we started the program, we didn't even think about a virtual practicum. So this is not necessarily a bad thing. It's giving you some more choices to do. And to be honest with you, because so many people, again, are not returning back to physical work, we may just turn this into a virtual practicum from now on in, because we have done it like 3 groups have gone through with virtual, and it's been really successful for them. And they've really been able to produce some important work that's gone across. They've been involved and have worked on high-level projects that have gone all across their organizations, because everybody's working virtual now. So it's not so strange anymore. All right, guys, everybody have a great weekend. And again, look out for Sadie's emails. Thanks.